Hello everybody, Jim Cornette here for Ring of Honor and another edition of the Straight Shootin' series. And usually I'm the wrestling expert with all the notes and the facts and figures, but in this case, I'm going to learn something along with everybody else because my guest today is without doubt one of the biggest box office draws, one of the true superstars of Lucha Libre in Mexico, as well as having been a star in WCW, currently on fire in TNA, a whole lot more. Konnan, thank you very much for being with us on the Straight Shootin' series. And I guess I got to ask you something that I didn't know until just recently. When you trained to become a professional wrestler, you trained in the same class as Rey Mysterio Jr., and you were actually both trained by Rey's uncle, the original Rey Mysterio. How did you get interested in becoming a wrestler? I know you were a fan since you were a kid, and how did you go about making the step to train?
Yeah. I actually told this story for the very first time in my whole life about a year ago, and when I said it, it was kind of funny to the people that heard it. This is the first time I'm probably saying it publicly. Basically, what had happened was I used to be in the Navy and I used to box, and I was playing a basketball game one day and I got into a fight, and this guy that was walking his dog saw me, and he was a wrestling. He told me he was a wrestler, so he asked me if I wanted to go to Tijuana and wrestle. I lived in San Diego at that time, which is on the border of Tijuana, and I told him, nah, I thought wrestling was fake and all this other stuff. So he showed me a championship belt, and I kind of marked out, and he said, I used to be the world champion, and the guy had a limp. So I thought, fuck, if this guy can be the world champion, maybe I can be the world champion one day, So I kind of marked out over that. And so he brought me to Tijuana to a show, and at that time I was real big because I was bodybuilding. I had just gotten off an injury in boxing, and while I was rehabbing it, I got into bodybuilding, so I was pretty big. And so we went to Tijuana, and he told the promoter that I had wrestled in Florida before. And the guy goes, really, where had you wrestled? And he kind of told me, go along with it.
Yeah.
And I go, well,
Work with me.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, I went, I worked in Florida, and I threw out some names. The guy goes, all right, I'm going to put you in a match, next week, So the guy was, like, really excited. And I was kind of embarrassed because I was afraid that if I bounced off the ropes, I might go through the ropes and somebody might laugh at me. And that was my main concern. And I kept telling the guy, well, I don't know how to wrestle. And he kept telling me, just go in there and knock the guy out. And I thought, fuck, man, I've never seen anybody do that. You know what I'm saying? That's a pretty novel idea. Just goes in there, knock them out like you do in boxing. And just something didn't sit right. You know what I'm saying? And I kind of knew it was a work, but I really wasn't too sure. And so...
Because in those days before the internet, even the closest fans really didn't know.
Yeah.
They may know something was up, but not how it was done or the terminology or the way to go about it.
And I didn't know about dirt sheets. I wasn't a smart mark. And in Mexico, the business is still way more protected than it is in the United States.
Which is probably why it's more popular.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's easier to get angles over because people haven't seen a lot of stuff. Stuff hasn't been done to death. So, anyways, to make a long story short, the guy, the night comes and I see my name on the first match, and he called me the Incredible Hulk. And I got really nervous, and I was like, fuck, man. I kept telling him, what if they throw me through the ropes and I fall through the ropes? That was my main concern. I was embarrassed that I might fall through the ropes. I didn't give a damn about going in there knocking the guy out, right? So he kept saying, don't worry about it. He goes, just go in there, knock him out. You'll be a big sensation. Just knock everybody out. You'll go on a winning streak. And he kind of had me worked up. And then they hadn't made my outfit on time. So he tried to lend me his stuff, and I didn't want to wear his stuff. So I just told him, you know what, bro? I just want to learn how to hit the ropes. Okay, once I learn how to hit the ropes, I'll wrestle.
From there, it's cool.
Right.
Yeah.
So he brings me to this training center the next day, and Rey Mysterio's uncle's there. And he was like a real big name in Tijuana, and he's putting on oil and all this. And he's looking at me, and he goes, oh, so you've wrestled in Florida before, right? And I go, I better tell him the truth because he's about to stretch me. And I go, nah, I've never wrestled in Florida. I just said that because, my manager, the world champion, he goes, your manager? Here I am about to train and I have a manager already? And he goes, your manager? And, and I go, yeah, the world champion. He goes, the world champion who? And the guy's name was John Roberts. And he goes, John Roberts. And he looks at me and goes, that guy's a mark. He's a fan. And I was so embarrassed.
Oh, my God.
A fan had worked me into thinking that he was the world champion. I go, well, where did he get the limp? The guy had a prosthetic leg, you know. And he had told me that he was such a badass that they had broken his leg in a match and they threw him out of the business. And I believed all this shit, you know what I'm saying? So that's how I got into the business. A mark actually worked me into thinking he was the world champion.
Indirectly, you got hooked up with the original Rey Mysterio, who was probably one of the better trainers because he was a famous name in Mexico. Once you got there, and okay, that had to be the original Odd Couple, you and Ray.
Yeah.
With you all jacked up and Ray like, what, 120 pounds when he started.
Yeah.
What was it like training with it? Did you see anything special in him? Did he see anything special in you? You guys probably were friends right off, but professional.
Well, I was maybe 21 years old, and Ray must have been 12 years old. He was a little kid. He actually looked like a little girl, and he was really skinny, had long hair, little rosy cheeks. Psychosis was also in that class. I don't know if you ever saw him. He was in that class, and because his brother was one of the guys that trained us along with Rey Mysterio Sr., and these other guys that are famous in Mexico right now. One of them wrestled in WCW as Ciclope, but he wrestles now in Mexico's Halloween. He's got a huge name there, and another guy called Damien. So our class actually had a couple guys that really made it big in Mexico. And, you know, we were all like young kids, and like Ray was a little bit too young for me to hang out with because he hung out with like kids his age, you know.
Yeah.
And I was kind of still on the streets hustling. You know, I was selling drugs and shit. But when we were in the ring, I liked him a lot because he was the only guy in my class that was bilingual. So we used to talk in English and we talk in Spanish, and you know, he was just such a charismatic, happy. If you've ever met Ray, he's a very happy-go-lucky guy, and you know, he was like a little brother to me. And the one thing that I remember then that has translated to here is I always thought, wow, this is something that can work in his favor instead of, you know, the mindset of he's too small. I always thought, let's take his size and use that to his favor, which is what now Vince has done.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people would always say, he's too small, he's too small. Like when I first went to WCW, remember the very first time he got there, people didn't know our relationship, and they were making fun of him, and they were making comments out loud like, oh, well, are we going to start a midget division? You know, well, maybe I should get my little brother into wrestling, you know. And I remember going up to Ray and going, Ray, man, they're hating on you. Go out there and stick it in their ass, bro. And I was in WCW maybe 4 years, and we had a roster talent that was incredible. In all the years that I was there, and all the matches that I was there, I only saw the boys give 2 matches a standing ovation. Like when they came back, that everybody was standing and clapping, was that match, his debut match. Even Hogan, Macho, everybody, they'd never seen anything like this. And he wrestled Dean Malenko, who's awesome.
Yeah.
And the other match they did that too was Eddie and Rey Mysterio, Halloween Havoc in Vegas, you know. So, you know, that, you know, they broke the height. They broke, to me, what was the blueprint for wrestling. You no longer had to be 6 feet tall or super fat or very muscular, you know, to get over, you know.
Well, that's the thing is, and I mean, it wouldn't work if you took a normal guy that was 5'3" and 140 pounds, but Rey Mysterio has such charisma and the talent and the way that he can do those things and incorporate them into a match, make them make sense, nail things almost every time. I mean, it's like watching an artist. And that's, to me, I'm surprised that Vince made the move because he's so size conscious. But once he finally, I think, saw, you know, what he had there, he had no choice to. But what year did you start as a pro after you finished training?
It might have been 88.
So the preeminent promotion then in Mexico was CMLL, which I guess, or not,
the
or was
preeminent promotion there was called UWA.
So UWA was on top at that point.
UWA, and just so you'll see how big they were, UWA was a promotion where the main star was a guy called Konnan, okay? And they were the promotion where all the guys from Japan would come in. When they came to Mexico, that's where they went. Stan Hansen, Brody, Andre, you know, Fujinami.
Konnan actually is one of the few guys that pinned Andre in a match a long time ago at I think El Toreo.
Yeah, El Toreo. Yeah, that's where I started, Toreo. So, that was, they had, their talent roster might have been the best I've ever seen in my life, anywhere at any time. It was incredible, the talent that they had back then with no TV. And they used to fill that place out. Toreo must hold about 17,000, and I kid you not, every Sunday it was packed with no TV.
Well, that's what a lot of people might not understand that aren't familiar with wrestling in Mexico, is that TV is more of a new thing, because before wrestling boomed with no television, with the idea, don't give it to them for free because then they'll have to pay to go see it, and that worked for all the years since the business started until maybe the late 80s, early 90s with the formation of AAA. But I get ahead of myself a little bit, because between your debut and the formation of AAA, where you really started drawing some incredible houses, you had flirtations with the WWF at that time, and also I think we were talking earlier, Joe Pedicino's Global Wrestling. But what was the plan in the WWF? It was a brief situation there, and I think something just didn't work out.
What happened in WWF is, I had grown up my whole life watching the NWA because I lived in Miami.
Right.
And so, I was kind of a mark for the NWA and everything it stood for, from the logo. That's what I remember from when I was 6 years old. That's the wrestling I watched. And, I never grew up wanting to be a wrestler. Like I said, wrestling came into my life because of this mark that got me into wrestling. But, it was always, like any other kid, I watched wrestling. And so when I was in WCW, they were going to put me, because I had originally been in Calgary for a little while before they closed, and I had made friends with Brian Pillman. So they were going to put me and Brian Pillman together, but the booker at that time had just gotten fired. What was his name? Ole. Yeah.
Ole Anderson.
Ole Anderson.
Which time? It could have been one of five,
The one before, I
think.
The
revolving door of bookers.
Yeah, I think the one right before Dusty Rhodes took over one of his many shows too.
Right.
And I remember that Jim Ross, I think it was Jim Ross was there, and he had told me to wait, that they were changing bookers. For whatever reason, somehow, some way, WWE had seen me on TV, and Pat Patterson was always calling me and calling me and calling me, and I just was kind of a mark for NWA, and I wanted to be there. And I got soured on them, because one time Ole was talking to me, and I don't know how this came up, and I was young and stupid, and I said something like, I really want to be in to me it's really an honor to be in NWA. I really want to be there. And he'll cut the bullshit. Why do you really want to be here? And I go, no, I grew up watching. Yeah. I liked Flair and the Stein. And, he was being kind of a dick.
He was being Ole.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I never knew him that well, but I guess he was. And so, he was kind of being a dick with me. And Patterson was always calling me and being very nice. He goes, well, so are they going to use you? Aren't they going to use you? And, we'll pick you up in a limo. And I'd never been in a limo in my life, so I kind of marked out for that too. And he goes, we'll pick. And I remember it was New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, and he actually called me to wish me a Happy New Year. And your WCW, they were still going through this tumultuous thing between bookers, and I remember Ole being a dick. So I just
and they would wish you Merry Christmas if you walked up in front of them, much less call you to say Happy New Year.
Right.
Yeah.
So he brought me over there, and I was telling you this before. Percy Pringle was with me there that day. We actually both got hired on the same day. Vince kind of just told Percy, you're hired, but he actually brought me into the office, and he, we talked, and he was real cool, and I just gave him this idea that I had when I was in Japan. I told him I had saw this robot that shot. It had these tubes on its arms, and one tube shot smoke, the other one shot confetti, and I was thinking of a way where maybe we can put some sort of, I had the exact term back then, but it was just like a jetpack where I could actually fly from the entrance and go fly into the ring, and he loved it. So he invested a lot of money to make this robot outfit, and so I would go every TV taping to the shows, and they would modify the robot. First it was really bulky, and they were taking pieces off of it, and then he would have me walking around like a robot. Then he had me dancing, and he really liked the thing. But the thing is that here I was a new guy in the company, and the haters were everywhere. And I found out later on, way later, that, you know, Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels had buried me to Vince, which I'm pretty sure they did it just because they were jealous. You know, I give Scott Hall's credit for having the balls to tell me. You know, I just thought it was a bitchy thing to do. But anyways, you know, I wasn't on the road with the guys. I only came in for TV tapings, and I would bring in wrestlers from Mexico. I remember I brought in Art Barr. I brought in this guy called Rambo. And so, you know, I would go out there and do Lucha Libre, which they'd never seen before. Maybe Sean felt threatened. I don't know what the reason was, but the thing is, I found out later on that I had actually come to a show one day, and Vince used to fly in all the robot outfit. They would send it to LA, have it modified, and then they would fly it out to wherever I was at, and I would have to pick it up and bring it to the show so he could watch me put it on and whatever modifications he needed to make. Well, usually that entailed me bringing another taxi cab full of boxes.
Right.
So, you know, I would always get to the show, and, you know, whoever the agent was would pay for it, right? So this is what Scott Hall told me, that I had actually gotten to a show once and I came out. He says that I was cocky and that I said, well, who's going to pay for this? And that Arnold Skoland, you know, that I talked to Arnold Skoland in a flippant manner, and that I was like, yeah, you need to take care of this, which I know I didn't say that because I wouldn't have disrespected anybody. I'm pretty sure I said something like, you know, who's going to pay for the taxi? Because that's what Vince told me to say. They worded it in a way where it made me look like I was being a dick, you know. And
now, one of those guys actually misrepresents some information. I find this hard to believe, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to register my protest.
Yeah,
but go.
Exactly. So add that to the fact that at that same time, and everything happens for a reason, I had just started working in a soap opera, which became huge. So, you know, here I was doing monster business in Mexico, and, you know, I missed a couple TV tapings. And so, from what I understand, Paul Diamond went up one day, and he said, hey, I fit in his outfit. And so they gave him the... so they gave him the...
I fit the suit.
Yeah, so they gave him...
Give me the spot. Well,
Right.
you know, but that's the thing. In the first 4 years of your career, really, you trained, you debuted.
Yeah.
You'd wrestled all the places you just mentioned. You had the WWE thing going on. You got a role in a soap opera in Mexico.
Yeah.
So this was really in the first 4 years. A lot of things started clicking.
Yeah.
And it was about that time, I guess, that Antonio Pena broke off from the... Was it CMLL then, or
CMLL.
was it so? And it's EMLL now, but same
Yeah,
basic
same thing,
promotion, and sort of like NWA, WCW.
Right.
And when he formed that group, you were one of the first people that went in. Is that correct?
Yeah. What had happened was I left the Toreo because Connect, you know, there was a glass ceiling there, and Connect just wouldn't let me be one of the top stars. He just kept beating me and beating me and beating me. And even though I was terrible as a wrestler and I was really green, I was very charismatic. And
well, plus you were on a mainstream television show, so it would seem like they would want to try to do something with that.
Yeah. And so I left that promotion and I went to Arena Mexico, which is EMLL. CMLL, this is a funny story. CMLL was actually, one of the reasons CMLL was actually made is in Mexico, just to show you how much they protect stuff there. If you want to be a world champion, you have to have been born in Mexico. I was so hot at that time, and there was another guy there called Vampiro, who's Canadian, who was so hot that they needed to put a belt on us. So they made Consejo Mundial de Lucha Libre. They actually made CMLL so they could have their own belts and give it to anybody else that was a Mexican. That promotion was made so they could give us belts. That's how hot we were back then. And so what happened was that he, when we were in CMLL, not only was I doing a soap opera, I had just done a rap record. So I was really, really hot. And Pena had like all the young guys that were going to be like he had another guy called Octagon who had just made a movie, and he had all these other wrestlers, and basically there was another guy in the company, his name was Juan Herrera, and then he would take care of like the older cats. So there was kind of a struggle between both of us, and the owner, his name is Paco Alonso, you know, he was always having to make Juan happy and make Pena happy, and it was just a constant struggle. There was actually a fight between those two groups in the company, you know, and something had to give. So what had happened was Herrera, and this is kind of a long story and I'll make it very short. Herrera had, in Mexico, you would go to the office every Monday and you would see what your shows were and you write them down on a piece of paper, and you knew where to go. So what Herrera would do is on Mondays, he wouldn't put some of the shows I was supposed to be on, so I'd miss them. And he told Paco that I was missing shows because I was too busy doing my soap opera. And I go, no, I fucking went and the thing wasn't there. So what happened was this, Paco decided, I had just won the first CMLL championship. It was like a real big deal. And my very first defense, it was in a place called Monterrey. I'll never forget it. It was in Monterrey, early 90s, against this guy called Cien Caras. And they had a meeting with like all the promoters in Mexico. And Paco goes, we're going to take away Konnan's belt. And Pena was there, and he said that all the promoters said, how can you take away his belt? He's like the hottest thing we have right now. He's been missing too many shows and blah, blah, blah. And Pena knew that this was Herrera with his bullshit. So he came up to me that show, and he goes, look, they're going to take the belt from you. He goes, you know, and I actually started to cry. I was so pissed off because I was just tired of their bullshit. And he said, you know what? I'm tired of their shit too. I'm going to start a new company. He goes, are you with me? And I said, yeah. And he said, you know, if you leave, you're probably never going to be able to come back. It's either sink or swim. I said, fuck these guys. And me and him always had a real good connection because when I lost my mask in Mexico, and you got to remember, back then when I lost my mask, if you lost your mask, usually your career was over. That was it. You lost your mask because you were about to retire and you were going to get a big payday. That was really the whole thing behind masks. Now it's kind of changed. So I was wrestling Perro Aguayo, who was like, I mean, he was the man in Mexico. And even though he was a heel, he was like Ric Flair. He was a beloved heel. And he, the people just loved the guy. And he was Mexican, which I wasn't. So I had worked out this gimmick where I had this little kid who I said was my brother, which he wasn't. He was about 6 years old. He was there with my girlfriend, who at that time was very famous in Mexico. And they were sitting in the first row. They kept saying, oh, Konnan brought his little brother from Mexico, and he has a mask on. And he went into the ring, and I remember he was dressed up as a little cowboy. And he went, and he ran over, and he kicked Perro Aguayo, right? And everybody popped. You know, they really liked him. And back then, wrestling was only on. On Sundays at 12 o'clock on Channel 2. Channel 2 in Mexico is almost like if you put NBC, CBS, and ABC together. It was a monster channel. Right. And at that time, everybody had already gotten back from church. And if you didn't go to church, we were usually waking up from a night of being drunk. So it was the golden hour. You know, everybody watched wrestling. 1 hour, that was it. Not like now. Right now, our show's 3 hours. AAA, CMLL has a show that's 3 hours. Then they have another show. I mean, there's so much wrestling.
This was like more like in the old days, the territories, when you had 1 hour weekly in an area to watch, but the area happened to be Mexico City, which had 10 million people.
Right, exactly. So everybody was watching wrestling back then. And then what happened is that, so when I lost them, so we did this thing in the match that it was me and Pena had come up with the finish. Paco, who was the owner, which hardly ever went to the matches, and he always used to, you know, he's a multimillionaire, and his money, he has money from his family. His family was one of the first millionaires in Mexico. They're called the Luchadors. And I mean, wrestling right now, the wrestling business could close and he'll still be a multimillionaire.
Right.
You know, they own half of Tijuana. I mean, they're owed money. And so, anyways, most of the time he wouldn't even go to the show. He let Pena run everything. So me and Pena got together and we concocted this idea. And at the end, what would happen is I was going to be arguing with the referee, who was a heel ref. They'd never had a heel ref in Mexico before. This guy was the first one. And while I was arguing with him, Perro Aguayo drop kicked me from behind. I headbutted the ref. He went outside. He juiced, right? And you got to remember, this had never, ever been seen in Mexico before, a heel ref or even using him for a finish. So, so I go in and I hit Perro Aguayo with a power bomb or something, and I'm on top of him, and I'm counting 1, 2, and the people are counting with me. He rolls in and he counts 1, 2. He stops the match, and he gives him the victory, you know, and he's bleeding, and he's saying that, you know, I headbutted him, but what he didn't know is Perro had kicked me into him. So the places, I mean, they're pissed. They're throwing stuff in the ring, and they're like, they can't believe I just got screwed. It's
and
like,
when Mexican fans get mad, it's dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, and they're way more passionate than American fans because they really believe what they're seeing. So the thing is that the fans, even though I wasn't Mexican, they were pissed off because that's the one thing they hate. They hate for somebody to get fucked over. You know,
Right.
beat them like a man. A Mexican would beat another Mexican like a man. You know,
Yeah.
so they're mad. The little kid comes in, and usually what they do in Mexico is they'll say your real name, your age, where you're from, and you usually take off your mask, and you have to give it to your opponent, or he takes off your mask. This had never been done either. I'd already talked to the kid, you know, to what we were going to do. I get on my knees. He hugs me, right? And he takes off my mask, and I take off his mask. And he hugs me and he's crying. He doesn't want nobody to see my face. Man, you have no idea how many, to this day, I have kids that come up to me and tell me they cried when they saw it. It was a very touching moment, and it turned me into the biggest baby face in that country. And that's when I think Pena kind of thought, wow, this guy gets it, and I want him to help me. And that's how he picked me to go to AAA and basically start that company with him.
And we talked about also the impact of AAA, the first 3 years especially of the promotion, as Dave Meltzer had written in the Observer obituary of Antonio Pena, his influence, the first Triple Mania on April 30th of 93, you were the main event against Cien Caras. 48,000 people sell out, thousands turned away. It didn't just extend to Mexico, because they branched out to Los Angeles, the Sports Arena, on August 28th, 93, with you, Caras, and Jake Roberts at a three-way, 17,500 people, 8,000 turned away. For a company to start with that much fire and to be drawing those type of record crowds, and I mean, before, when you'd worked with Aguayo in 91 at Arena Mexico, I believe Pena was probably mostly responsible for the booking. Mm-hmm. 5 straight sellouts weekly, 17,000 apiece. Yeah. So he took that star power, he took the ideas, and started AAA. It was on fire, and pretty soon, AAA became the dominant promotion in Mexico. It would almost be like starting a promotion from scratch here in this country, and within a year, they're beating the WWE. It's almost impossible. What was it like working in front of those types of crowds, and especially being out on the ground floor of a new company after that long history?
You know, it was very exciting because I actually made this statement once, and I'll make it again. I'll put our first 4 years against anybody's first 4 years in the business, and maybe anybody's 4 years, not even in the embryo. I mean, it was just incredible. I think, as you'll know, because, you know, you've made history yourself with the Midnight Express and with other stuff, when you're making history, you don't really realize you're making it because you're caught in it. You know what I'm saying? So we were first trying to survive because, you know, Paco used every political, financial ploy, anything he could do to try to cut us off at the knees.
Right.
You know, and it was a very, very dirty war. It became very personal. You know, like their wrestlers hated our wrestlers hated them, you know, and it became really ugly. But, you know, I was just so young and enthusiastic, and he was so enthusiastic and young himself. You know, I've always really believed, whether it's, you know, some of the best booking have always been from some of the youngest people that have never really had a history in wrestling per se. And I'll give you an example. If you remember, like in New Japan in the 80s, you know, Shima, you know, he brought in Dynamite Kid, and he brought in the British Bulldog and all these guys, you know, and he revolutionized, you know, Tiger Mask. He revolutionized junior heavyweight wrestling.
Brought in the guys from England and Germany, Steve Wright, Rollerball Rocco, etc.
Exactly. If you look at, you know, Paul Heyman, what he did with ECW. If you look at, you know, Pena, myself, you know, what we did with Mexico. If you look at, like, what Gabe's doing with ROH. It always takes, like, a young guy to kind of think outside of the box and come in with what's not been, go outside the parameters of what's, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so I really believe that what Mexico needed at that time was Pena and Konnan, because what we did is, before it would take, you know, 8 to 10 years for a guy to make it from the first match to the second match to the third match. We said, well, why? Because you have to pay your dues, because you have to learn wrestling. So our idea was like, okay, look at me. I broke into the business, and I, you know, I came to the top like that, and they were smart enough to put me with good enough workers where they would hide my weaknesses, and I became like a big draw. So why couldn't we do that with other guys that were special?
It's always been about selling tickets, and to me, you can't put somebody in that just totally can't perform, but at the same time, if you get a guy, a prodigy, I mean, look at The Rock. He was in the business 5 years total, and he set the biggest one-night pay-per-view record of all time during that time.
Right.
If you get a guy that's special and he can sell tickets,
Right.
find a way to use him.
Right.
Whether it be Mysterio because he's small, or whether it be this guy because he's a little green, or whatever the case
Right.
may be. Sometimes you've got to take that step, and I think the old-time promoters in the United States or in Mexico were reticent to use new talent because he's just a green kid, he doesn't know what he's doing. Well, now everybody's a green kid and doesn't really know what they're
Right.
doing, so
Right.
you got to take a chance or you don't have a business.
And not only that, you got to remember in Arena Mexico, you had the same problem you find in WWE, and we saw in WCW. When you bring in young guys that are athletic, they raise the bar, which puts their job in jeopardy.
Right.
So instead of them saying, okay, let's work with this kid and let's make money with him, they're trying to figure out ways of how to hold him back and how to hold him down and how to break him and play ribs on him and run him out of the business, which is so stupid. So you had none of those politics in AAA. I was running the place with Pena, and I was the biggest draw. So basically, I brought in, Eddie Guerrero. He was actually in Arena Mexico. He was wearing a mask, and I actually convinced him to come to AAA and take off his mask on TV, and they never forgave him for that, because you had to lose your mask in a match. And he actually took the mask off and said, "My name is Eddie Guerrero, el hijo, the son of El Gran Gori Guerrero." Gori Guerrero, his dad, was considered pound for pound maybe the greatest wrestler in Mexican history, He goes, "I'm el hijo de Gori Guerrero, el hermano de Chavo, Mando, and Hector. I'm, their brother." He goes, "I don't need a mask,
Well, and as a matter of fact, that may have been a bold move for him to take the mask off,
Yeah.
but honestly, being a member of the Guerrero family
Yeah.
would mean more money
Right.
than anybody's mask at that point that he could put on, or that he
But
could,
my point,
any other...
my point being, that's how backward thinking they still thought, and that's how forward thinking we were. So we were that young company that was, pushing Rey Mysterio and La Parca and Konnan and, Hijo del Santo, and, we were the company that was breaking all
There's
the
nothing.
taboos.
How hard is it to come up with an idea for the son of the most famous,
Right.
most popular wrestler in the history of the culture?
Right, exactly.
The son of Santo.
Exactly.
But yet, I understand he was in first or second match because of the size difference
Yeah.
with the established promotion. But and here, there's a dichotomy. A lot of people would say that, well, AAA and Antonio Pena may have been the Vince McMahon of Mexico because he broke away from the established traditions.
Yeah.
He used a lot more entrances, a lot more music. But at the same time, he was the exact opposite of Vince McMahon in a lot of ways, in that he opened up the doors for smaller wrestlers,
Right.
and really still wanted to keep making the stars in the ring.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, the other group, the established group, was like the NWA, old line, old school tradition.
Yeah.
But there were differences between the way Pena attacked his philosophy and the way Vince attacks his.
Well, what Pena did is, he was heavily influenced by Vince McMahon, but he took the best parts of Vince. It's almost like what American wrestlers have done. If you look at Lucha Libre, it's hard to understand. Sometimes it's kind of stupid. Sometimes there's a lot of comedy involved, and a lot of times there's zero psychology. What a lot of the American wrestlers today have done, what they've done is they've taken the best of Lucha Libre and they've incorporated with American psychology and throw in some of that Japanese physicality.
Yeah.
And it's a hybrid that now you're seeing like here in ROH and everywhere else.
It's an influence, a
Yeah.
move or a spot
Yeah,
or an
right,
idea.
right.
But now,
So
let me...
Pena took Vince McMahon's, he was influenced by the best parts of Vince McMahon.
Let me ask you this while we're on the subject. A lot of people say, and with some correctness, to be honest, because I was there when Vince was starting to deal with Pena, it was hard to deal with Antonio Pena because he never made a deadline, because he did everything at the last minute. But that's the way
Yeah.
the business operated in Mexico.
Yeah.
You didn't sell advance tickets. You didn't really publicize a card in advance. You built up one match over a period of shows, but there wasn't huge advance publicity.
Yeah.
So with you having worked in both countries, you can see the frustration, but at the same time, could he go back and re-rack his entire business in Mexico to deal with people in another country?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer that for you. It's like, have you ever been to Puerto Rico?
I have not.
Okay. If you go to Puerto Rico, it's funny. Because I'll go to see, it's easy for me to see both sides.
When I was a heel, I didn't go because I heard about the fans, and I want to live.
But here's the thing. You got to remember, I grew up my whole life in the United States, so I know how Americans think, but I also know how Latinos think and how they live. And it's funny to me because I've been to Puerto Rico or to Mexico with other wrestlers or the Bahamas, and they're all the same. You know, these are third world countries basically that, you know, they don't sweat anything. They take their time. If you've gone to a Burger King in Puerto Rico, you'll want to kill somebody because they take their time. You know, they'll be on the phone, you know, and, you know, when you come here, you know, you've got drive-through where it actually says, you know, 30 seconds or free. You know, everything here is quick. Everybody's in a hurry. Nobody's in a hurry to get anywhere. You know, I mean, you know what I'm saying? So I've seen guys go to Burger King over there and they're all pissed off. Fuck, in the United States, they would have been done a long time ago and all this other bullshit. And that's how Mexico is. They take their time with everything. So when you're dealing with a Latino, you can't really pressure him because there's no deadlines.
It's a different time zone.
Exactly.
It's a different time zone.
And so Pena would drive people crazy, and it would drive me crazy because I grew up, you know, in the States where, you know, if people say 2 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock. You know, Pena had no problem rolling in at 4, you know, and in his mind as well, at least I'm
Or
here.
maybe at 2 o'clock the next day.
Right. What's the problem? At least I made it. Better late than never. You know, and it was hard to do business. And that's one of the problems I'm having now because now I have to break 14 years of Pena's disorganization and the way he did business. You know, to me, I'm very, I like to, you know, I work more with an American mindset, you know what I'm saying? And Pena was very difficult to deal with because he was always late, you know, and very disorganized.
Here's another thing you touched on a little bit earlier, but the fans in America couldn't be expected to be mind readers, or you know, you don't expect when you present somebody on television that the fans are going to go, okay, I got to go research this guy's career. If you're selling a product, you need to sell the product. You need to explain it. WCW, WWF, both at various times have brought in luchadors and have never given any effort to explaining the status and the history of the masks, or the importance of the mask and the character, or how much it means to the individual, or the importance of the hair matches, or anything that makes American fans and maybe would make American wrestlers understand the style and the way it's done. They just see boom, 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 and they don't understand because they haven't been taught. Why do you think? And I'll be honest. I was there when Pena first flew up to meet with Vince McMahon. I was involved in the booking committee at that time, so I was there at the meetings, and it seemed like they understood, and I brought up, hey, there's going to be a style clash. The people need to understand what we're presenting. You're going for a Latino market. You can bring anybody in to get American fans that you've already got, but if you're flying somebody all the way in from Mexico, basically, why don't you put the effort into educating people as to what they are? Well, I think they saw, oh, we're going to promote, we're going to have a show on Televisa, or we're going to promote in Latino countries, but they would put the luchadors, my long-winded question, they would put the luchadors on their regular program against their regular guys. They would have a style clash. They would do nothing to make the luchadors important or to be seen as stars, and therefore it was like high-priced job guys from Mexico. And the WWF did it for a while. WCW did it for a lot longer. What was the barrier? Why couldn't they understand you can't just plop this out like a turd on a plate? You have to explain it and sell it and make them seem important.
Well, you know, at first I got frustrated and I just said, oh, they're just racist, and I think that was an easy answer for me. But I just felt they'd never dealt with this before, and like anything else, you know, like anything else, when it first happens, you're gonna make mistakes, you know. I think now they understand that. And I'm sure if they had to do it again, I would think they'd be smart enough to know that's not the way to do it. You know, I was there and I told them, you can't put them against Americans because there's a language barrier, there's all the reasons you gave. I said, you need to put them against each other, you need to have hair versus hair mask. I explained to Eric what needed to be done, but, you know, Eric was very aloof and very ignorant.
And I think, and to be honest, I would not mind calling Vince McMahon any name that I felt was applicable correctly, but in this case, it wasn't racism. I think it was ignorance.
Yeah.
They did not. They were still okay. The biggest star in Mexico is Mil Mascaras in 1997.
Right.
And God bless the man for all that he's done, but he wasn't the biggest star in Mexico in 1997.
Right.
But that's where they still were.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. I think it was just ignorance, and they never had anything like this in their life, and they never had a scenario like this before, and they didn't know what to do, and they made a lot of mistakes. But and then they were ignorant because they didn't learn about the cultural things, the significance of the mask, the significance of hair versus hair. Do you know how many? Think about this. I told this to Eric, and he, Eric Bischoff, and he looked at me like I was crazy. I go, you've got Rey Mysterio and you've got Juventud Guerrera, all right? Two of the best wrestlers at that time, or I even told them it could have been Psychosis. Juventud Guerrera's father is a legend in Mexico. Rey Mysterio's uncle's a legend. They both started about the same time. They were both rookies of the year in Mexico. They both won match of the year in Mexico. They both came up together. I go, can you imagine if you have a feud between these two great athletes and the blow-off is you have a mask versus mask match? I go, that's how you do it. Well, we saw what happened. He ended up doing a match between Ray and Kevin Nash. That's real believable, right? For Miss Elizabeth's hair. That's real believable. That was the stipulation. If Nash lost Miss Elizabeth, so right there you take all credibility. It's almost like a joke.
And you know what? That's one thing about wrestling now.
Yeah.
It above all else, it has to be funny.
Right.
Not funny to the fans, just funny to the promoter.
Right. Exactly.
The start of the problems with WCW, I think, went back to, and we've talked about it, the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view. You were on a string in Los Angeles at the sports arena where AAA was outdrawing, they were outdrawing the WWE, and they were demolishing WCW. After that huge sellout in August of '93, in November, Jake Roberts, Art Barr, and Eddie Guerrero against you, Pena Aguayo, and Blue Panther through 12,500. March of '94, it was you against Jake Roberts in the cage, 14,000 people. November of '94, that was the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view. You and Pena Aguayo in the main event, a loaded card, obviously, but 13,000 people live, and on pay-per-view, which was co-promoted, or at least distributed by WCW because they had the pay-per-view connections. You guys were on fire in Los Angeles like no native wrestling promotion was at the time, and looking back on it, truthfully, I was involved in my own company in Tennessee and busy with that every day, and until I looked back at these figures, like say, when you're in history or it's going on, you don't realize it at the time. Right. That's ridiculously successful, and WCW evidently saw this and said, okay, we can get involved, we can distribute the pay-per-view. But then when I think Meltzer termed it the ethnic redheaded stepchild, outdraws and blows away anything that the parent company, in this instance the producer, is able to do, were they really, a second pay-per-view didn't materialize. There were problems with Ron Scholar, the local promoter in California, and Mr. Pena, et cetera, but the point is, would they have pushed another pay-per-view anyway, or would they have seen it as an embarrassment because a product from another country has come into their own country and has beaten what they can do?
Yeah. Looking back on that, I remember very well that I was very mad because I remember that we had like about 5 minutes left and they wanted to interview me. And to me, it was my first interview in the United States really ever. I had done a little bit of work with WCW, and I had done a little bit of work as Max Moon, but I wasn't a name, and this was my first chance to. And I remember that I was standing backstage, and they were like, they were deciding whether they were going to interview me or not, and they go, yeah, Eric said no. So to me, it was like, bro, we just put on a hell of a pay-per-view. Look at this house. That my match with Perro Aguayo, the intensity was off the charts. I remember that night it got so bad, Eddie Guerrero jumped into the crowd, I jumped into the crowd, and we got into a fight with people in the crowd. That's how passionate the fans were, and I was just so mad because I just remember thinking, fuck, since we're not WCW guys, they don't want to give us no airtime, and I just think we upstaged them, you know, and they just didn't want anything to do with us. I can't even believe we convinced them to do the show with us. I think Ron Scholar and Gary Juster kind of got that ironed out, because I was never really, I was always helping book and stuff like that. I never really did any of the office stuff, you know. But you know, it just kind of made me more passionate about bringing Lucha Libre to the United States. And that's why when I had the chance and I went to ECW, you know, I brought Ray and Psychosis, and then WCW, and I brought the Mexican wrestling, because I always thought that it would change the American landscape, which it has, because, you know, ROH and the X Division and the cruiserweights, all of that, you know, their father is Lucha Libre, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, my vision is to one day have a Lucha Libre promotion in the United States, whether it's AAA or some other promotion.
Well, that's jumping ahead, but I'll ask you about it now because you talked about it. It seems to me that with Latino population in America being the biggest minority now in the country, and wrestling being ingrained in the culture, it's only natural, and that's why it seems to me that WCW tried, but they didn't apply themselves to it. It was a half-hearted attempt. The WWF, even a shorter period of time. Everybody recognizes the market is out there. Nobody will capitalize on the market. And for Eddie Guerrero had to get himself over. I mean, it wasn't like the massive promotional machine was behind him until he showed that he was doing it himself. And then, of course, it would take a blind man not to follow up on it. Would it have to be, is it because the two styles are so different that they can't coexist on the same show? Does it need to be an all Lucha Libre promotion? Would that be successful in the United States?
Yeah. All Lucha Libre would be successful. I just think, you know, you've got to remember, nobody's made, you know, like I said before, it's always been easy for me to yell racism. But I think also, since nobody's made money off of Lucha Libre, they don't give a damn. I guarantee you that if tomorrow you and me opened up a company in the United States and Lucha Libre spread like wildfire, Vince would invest money in Lucha Libre. So they haven't seen nobody make money with Lucha Libre, and they haven't made no money with Lucha Libre. Therefore, they think there's no money to be made in Lucha Libre. And I guess those facts and figures, you know, exactly, you know.
60,000 people in 4 shows in Los Angeles, exactly. No money to be made there. But,
and it's fun, and I'll tell you what's even fun. You're from Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
What part are you from?
Louisville.
Okay, I was just in Louisville. No, which is the part that does the horse racing?
Lexington. Okay. Well, Louisville is the Kentucky Derby. Lexington is the home of the horse farms. They're close together.
Yeah, I went to Lexington.
You were pretty close either way.
Okay, I'm going to tell you something, and you're from Kentucky, so I know this won't surprise you. It is incredible, and that's the only word I can use, incredible. When I've been to places like Raleigh, North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, and there's a huge Mexican population, Nashville, Tennessee, because we're used to hearing about...
In Louisville, Kentucky, the home of Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? If you walk in a KFC, the menus are in English and Spanish.
That I didn't know. West of the Mississippi, everybody knows that's where all the Mexicans are, okay? You know, I mean, it's a given. California, Texas, Arizona, yeah, we understand that. But when you go to the South, and you see as many Mexicans as I have, you understand now that the demographics are changing. What are Mexicans doing in the South? What they're doing in the South is the following. First of all, real estate in California is very expensive. Border control over there has tightened. You know, when you go to like Nashville and places like that, you know, the employers kind of have the border patrol in their pocket. They don't really mess around too much with the migrants. Housing is a lot cheaper. There's a lot of construction going on. So you've got all these Mexicans, because you got to remember, Latinos are Mexicans, Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Nicaraguans, Dominicans. There's a whole bunch of us, but 65% of the Latino population is Mexican. Boom. Then the next biggest one is Puerto Rican, and they're only like 12%. So Mexicans are really the ones that are, you know, the biggest Latino population out there. I went to Lexington, Kentucky, and the promoter goes, I want you to come out here and do an autograph signing in a Mexican neighborhood. I go, in Lexington? He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, there's a lot of Mexicans out here. And I thought, all right, there's probably a couple hundred. Well, when I went to Lexington, Kentucky, it looked like a border town. If nobody's ever been to a border town is basically is the part of the United States that's on the border with Mexico, and you think you were in Mexico.
Yeah.
Because everything's in Spanish. Everybody there's Latino. You know, it's a little bit more rundown.
Working for World Class Wrestling, Fritz von Erich, we got stuck in a number of places where we were trying to find the building, and we couldn't find anybody in Texas,
Right.
in that particular town, who could speak English, because
Right.
it was right on the border.
Right.
So it does have a total Mexican
Yeah.
flavor. It
Yeah.
does seem like you're in another country.
Yeah. So I go there and I see, you know, these cash money places where Mexicans go, and they change their money to pesos and they send it to Mexico, and Mexican supermarkets and Mexican record stores. And I thought, my God, this is unbelievable here in Lexington. And so I went to this little supermarket to sign autographs, and the guy was a cheapskate. He had actually, instead of, you know, like going to Kinko's and making like, you know, 8x10, something
Right.
pretty nice, he had actually gotten a newspaper, a picture of me out of a newspaper. He had photocopied it, right? And he had given it to the fans, and he was selling it for like $20 if I autographed it. And they got in a line you wouldn't believe, and I was odd. If you did that to American fans, they'd probably go tell you to go fuck yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, they came and bro, it was incredible. And I thought to myself, right there, we were actually going to do some shows together. Me, him, and Sherry Martel. She was there. I guess she lived there or something. Or knew
I
him.
know the guy you're talking about.
Yeah.
Don't buy a used car for
Yeah,
that
right,
man.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. The car-
exactly.
But the
unfortunately, I did.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, he works
Yeah.
with cars, right. But here's the thing. I thought to myself, Jesus Christ, if I came here and I did a show, you know, every Mexican in this town would be here. And then if I went to Charlotte, and then if I went to Raleigh, and then if I went to Atlanta, and then if I went to Chicago, and then if I went to Dallas, and then if I went to Houston, bro, the market's out there. You know what I'm saying? And whoever capitalizes is going to be a multimillionaire. You know, now that I'm back in AAA, you know, I'm going to try to bring AAA over here and aggressively pursue that market.
Well, and see, that's one thing we talked about, the lucha libre style influencing American wrestling, but at the same time, to have a product that's geared toward the Latino market, you have to have you have to have more than one Latino superstar. You have to have the Latino babyface, Latino heel, Latino tag team, etc. And no American promotion has wanted to mix and match that much, and it is a clash of styles, but there's a market there. And that's what Vince was trying to tap into when all I heard was, well, the Latino population is increasing, and we could go to Mexico, and we could go to these Latin American countries or whatever. We could have the Super Astros television program. But then in practice, when they would bring the guys up, because they didn't work exactly like the guys they already had, I don't like that guy, or I don't like his work or that work, or somebody'd have something to say. I'm like, you didn't see this coming? And then I remember one meeting, I don't know who Pena's champion would have been at that time, maybe Heavy Metal? Could have been
yeah.
around that, but whatever. They're flying these guys up, and the minis got over like $1 million.
Right.
But I mean, how many? You can't have them every week.
Right.
It's a
Right.
you know, it's a special attraction. But they had Heavy Metal, I believe it was. But whoever Pena's champion was, they were going to have him put in a position where he was going to get beaten this match on TV in about 3 minutes, and then the other WWF heels were going to run in, and they were going to do some angle while this guy was laying there, and then maybe he could go ahead and somebody could drop on him. It's some ridiculous thing. And finally, I just sat up and said, while he's down there, why don't you go ahead and piss in his mouth?
Right.
And everybody looked at me like, well, I said, the guy is Pena's champion. I don't care whether you like his work, you think he'll draw 15 cents Chinese money here or not. You can't just take the guy's champion, the guy that you're wanting to have this business relationship with, and just make him look like a fucking moron in 3 minutes on television. Get some local job guy to do the same thing. Don't fly this guy from Mexico and make a fool out of everybody. And they were giving up on it before they had started. But
And let me just expound on that. That's the problem where ignorance comes in once again. You don't go to Japan and make fun of them because they eat with chopsticks. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, that's the way they work. And what you have to understand, all right, maybe you don't like how he works. Maybe Americans don't like how he works. But this is something for Latinos. So why don't you find out if Latinos like how he works? And that product's supposed to be for Latinos. So if you went to, like, let's say you went to Iraq, right? And in Iraq, when you walk into somebody's house, you got to take off your shoes. You don't go, well, in America, we don't take off our shoes. Well, fuck, you're in Iraq. You take off your shoes and you respect their culture. You respect the Mexican culture.
Besides that, respect their carpet. I got a brand new house, brand new carpet. And
Right.
I'm in America. I'm not in Iraq. But if somebody comes in my house, they take off their fucking
Right.
shoes. I want to keep my new carpet.
Exactly. But you know
respect
what I'm saying?
somebody's house.
Right. So respect, and they never respected the culture. Not Vince, not Eric. They never respected the culture. They were ignorant, and that's why Lucha Libre's never gotten over here. But now, if you look at TV, like for example, I have a little nephew, and I watch TV, and I'm amazed at, like, they have this show called Mucha Lucha, which is a whole bunch of little cartoon characters based on Lucha
the
Libre.
former WB network, now CW or whatever. Yeah.
Then they have another one called Dora the Explorer, and it's this little girl that's bilingual. Then they have another show called Pedro and Maya. So and it's a bilingual show. So now you've got all these kids that are starting to learn Spanish at a very early age. You know, it's incredible. Like I was talking the other day with BG James, Road Dogg. He was telling me how his son is learning Spanish in school. You know, so it's starting to change. And you got to remember, guys like Eric and Vince, they didn't go to school with Latinos. They probably didn't grow around them. You know, they didn't understand. You know, now you look at even hip-hop music, which was always like a black, you know, music. Now you've got the Puerto Ricans in it with reggaeton, you know, Daddy Yankee. You know, so it's like it's, you know how like for a while in the 80s, I had what I call like the blackization of the United States. You know, Chris Rock was big, Eddie Murphy was big in Living Color. You know, Martin the Show. You know, it's like BT. You know, like rap
Denzel, got started, Run DMC, whatever.
Right. Denzel Washington won the best first, you know, black guy I think ever. You know, and then the other one, what's her name? The black actress that just won it like a year or two ago, the pretty one. Halle Berry. Halle Berry,
nameless, faceless voice from The Wall just gave us Halle Berry. But
but you know what I'm saying? So now you look at Shakira in music, Ricky Martin. I mean, now Hispanics are starting to integrate and assimilate more, and you're hearing more words into the, you know, I mean, look at Arnold in California. He's our governor. You know, he made a remark about Hispanics not too long about having, you know, hot blood, and bro, he had to come out and apologize. You know, we are now getting political muscle. We are now, you know.
Well, he's from Austria, which is not too far from Germany. They've been a little testy in the past, once or twice themselves.
But you know what I'm saying? So I think now, you know, Lucha Libre is going to make it big, I think, for sure, you know, like within the next 5 years.
I'll tell you something I bet you that you don't know, and that I just thought of it actually when we were talking, is one of the territories in the United States that was most influenced first by Lucha Libre, besides Texas, obviously, which was, you know, always contained a certain amount of Mexican superstars, go back to Jose Lothario, etc. Tennessee. And in the 50s and 60s, and for a very weird reason, because Nick Goulas, as a promoter, was so notoriously cheap and tight that he would actually he would bring in a lot of Mexicans because they would be undocumented. He'd put them under masks. They'd wrestle 3 times under 3 different masks on the same show, and he could get away with paying them whatever he wanted to because they couldn't complain, or he'd get them kicked out of the country.
Right.
Which, you know, shows what a nice, compassionate guy Nick Goulas was. But as a result, Tennessee was always a territory for smaller guys as well. It did a lot of brawling, but the guys were smaller, maybe not as big of bodies, whatever.
Did a Mexican ever somehow break through and make it? Or
well, actually, a guy named Alex Perez was a huge heel and later became a good baby face in the Tennessee territory. And I know there was some others back in the 50s and 60s that were names. But at the same time, you would see it translated. The first time I ever saw a Hurricane Rana was Ricky Morton doing it. And he didn't do it on the fly, but it was the same principle. And a lot of those moves that the smaller guys could do were maintained in Tennessee then by the American wrestlers. But then later on, in 81, I guess it was, Hector Guerrero came in when nobody else would use him practically anywhere in the States because of his size. He was that big around. But he came in Tennessee and immediately got over as a babyface because he could do the ankle head scissors. He could do the moves that nobody else was doing, and people really took to that because it was more about an action thing. So even going back to the 50s and 60s, there was that influence on the style in a territory like Tennessee and Kentucky where there were really no Mexicans then. There were no Latino people then. But now that you talked about it, I realized that from growing up, a lot of the moves that I was seeing the American guys do at that point in time had been brought over by the cheap labor that Nick Goulas was able to get away with using for so long.
It's just funny to me that, you know, every time I read about, like, if they had one Latino in a territory, he almost invariably always got over because he had that different, exciting style. You know what I'm saying? I've heard stories like that in so many other places. But like, you know, getting back to what we were talking about, I really believe that You know, since nobody's made money in lucha libre, for whatever reason, they think there's no money to be made. The minute that they see somebody attack that market and make money off of it, lucha libre, not getting an American wrestler and getting him over with Americans like they did with Eddie or with Rey, but getting a true Latino audience, that you go in there and, you know, the announcing is in Spanish, you know, the snacks that they're selling are in Spanish, you know, everybody's cussing in Spanish. You're really gonna be surprised.
Do you think with WCW also the mistake they made was they didn't just present one or two a tag team or four or whatever. They brought, literally it seemed like 15 or 16 guys from Mexico all at once, all wearing masks, like we talked about, didn't bother to explain the mask. Could anybody get over in that field? I mean, you didn't have a mask. You had a different look. You had a little bit more size to you. But a lot of those guys, to me, I wasn't a regular WCW viewer, I admit, but when I would tune in, and I wouldn't be familiar with the guys, and I would try to keep track of who was who, and it was so hard. Do you think they would have gotten over better if they'd have been brought in a staggered fashion? I know the peso was devalued at that point in time. There were some problems. The guys wanted to come and make some money, but it seemed like there were too many too quick for anybody to really stand out, especially when they didn't understand, the fans didn't understand the mask's significance. They're a bunch of guys wearing masks.
Yeah, I brought in as many guys as Eric would let me bring in. What happened was me and him got to a point where he made me quit Mexico. And when he made me quit Mexico, I had a promotion there called Promo Azteca, which was like on fire. And he made me close that up. And basically when I closed that up, Pena and Paco blackballed me from wrestling because I almost put them out of business. And so I became very bitter towards him. I became very bitter towards him because, you know, he took Rey Mysterio's mask in the way he did and the way he did it to Juventud. You know, even Chris Jericho didn't want to do it because Jericho had wrestled in Mexico.
Now, he was Bischoff.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure, you know,
Bischoff.
because he made a lot of the guys then just turn around and take their masks off and just start wrestling without masks, which was not the optimum solution to the problem either.
Right, but basically the thing is I got in as many guys as I could because I wanted to bring Lucha Libre to the United States. The problem was it didn't matter if there was one guy or there were 15 guys. You got to remember, you know, WCW at that time had so many superstars, so much money, so disorganized, so many cliques, so much bureaucracy.
A lot of times they'd pay guys just not to work for anybody else.
Right.
And you'd never see them again.
Exactly. So he was hoarding talent, and then you had the top guys that didn't want talent to get over, and, you know, that's a discussion for another day, which is pretty well documented because everybody that's watching this is a hardcore mark, and they know already what happened in WCW. So, you know, you had friends taking care of friends, and, you know, the Mexicans had no friends politically. You know, you had this clique, you had, you know, Kevin Nash's clique, you had Kevin Sullivan's clique, Ric Flair's clique, Eric Bischoff's clique, and, you know, everybody, it was dog eat dog there. So to me it was like, all right, at the end of the day, the way I looked at it was like, well, you know, back up the Brinks truck and I'm going to take as much money as I can.
There you go.
Because obviously they're not going to do shit for us.
Yeah,
you know?
get all the guys some work and at least they're going to make a living
Right.
and see what happens later on in Mexico.
Yeah, there was, I mean, they were having trouble getting over the guys they had, much less getting over some Mexicans that A, didn't know the style, B, didn't know the language, and C, had no political allies in the office. So you had all those things working against them, you know what I'm saying? And then you had a company that, you know, was ignorant about how to get them over. So they had so much going against them. There was no way, even if we had 3 guys there, that they were going to get them over.
How do you feel about the way they used you personally? Because at least you did know the language, and you didn't wear the mask, and you did have a look, and you did have the size, and you had more of a name in this country. So, but once again,
I was kind of mad because I was lied to twice. The first time I was brought in, I was in ECW, and I was happy there. And you know, woman, Nancy Sullivan, was I was real good friends with her, and we'd always talk in the dressing room, and she told me Kevin was interested in me. And I said, okay, if I come, I want him to take a look at Rey Mysterio and Psychosis. And then, you know, which he did. But Kevin kind of brought me, because I didn't want to go, my idea was not to go to WCW. I was kind of mad at the United States. I didn't like the product, and I was really hot in Mexico. My idea was, I just wanted to work with Paulie and ECW because I loved his product and I was very heavily influenced by it. So when I went there, I was just thinking about working for Paulie, never, the other two.
Right.
So Kevin talks to Nancy, and he tell Konnan we'll offer him this much, which was a very big sum, and he'll be working with Hulk Hogan. Now, let me just tell you, Hogan for me never did anything for me. I never really marked out over him. I never really thought he was a real big deal. Nothing against him because he was always cool with me. Right. But I understood that if I worked with Hogan, I'd work on top. And so he told me, all right, tell him we'll do something with him and Hogan here, and then we'll do something with him and Hogan in Mexico. And Hogan was a big name in Mexico. So I thought, good, if I'm going to be working on top and I'm going to be making a lot of money, because if I'm working with Hogan, I know I'm going to make money, and then we can bring it over to Mexico and make money there, that'll be sweet. So they brought me under that premise. I think you never saw rivalry between me and Hogan.
Did y'all ever bump into each other in the locker room, maybe?
Yeah, I think one time when I was part of the NWO C team, remember when they had that last team, it was me, Norton, Buff Bagwell. We were the guys that always did run-ins and fucking,
another idea that worked until it got done to death is that now
exactly.
47 people are members of the NWO.
That was the closest I got to working with Hogan. Like I said, I was not a mark for him. I really didn't care. But I understood that if I worked with him, that meant cheese. So I was all about making money. So he brought me under that pretense. Then he stuck me in the Dungeon of Doom, which, it wasn't anything big. I mean, the Dungeon of Doom, where, let's face it, they were just basically jobbers for Hogan and whoever whoever his team was, the Superpowers or whatever the fuck they were called. And so what happened was I became friends with Hall and Nash, and then they told me, hey, why don't you come into the NWO with us? When I went into the NWO, they put me in that little C team thing, and then they said, you know what, we're going to break away and we're going to make the Wolfpack. Now, the Wolfpack was kind of hot because it was me, Macho, Luger, Sting, and Nash, but at that time, Bischoff was mad at me, Nash, and Luger at the same time, and we happened to be on the same team. So instead of pushing us,
you bounce from heat crew to heat crew, don't you?
Yeah. So and then after that I was just fucked because I got into a fight with Nash, and then I got into a fight with Bischoff, and then Bischoff called me out one day in a meeting, and from there it was all downhill.
Publicly and.
Yeah, what had happened was.
What is his fascination with doing that? I've heard he's done that to several people.
Yeah. Well, he did it to Flair. I read now in his book, he was like, "Oh, we're real good friends, bro." I remember we were in there, and he goes, "The only guys that ever made any money in this fucking business is Nash, Hogan." I think it was like Nash, Hogan, Macho, Piper, and Flair's like.
Actually, I don't even think he mentioned that many people. I think wasn't it the only people that drew money were Hogan, Savage, and Piper. Or something like that,
right? Yeah. And I was waiting. How about Flair?
Yeah.
And then he goes, and I'm gonna make sure. I was in that meeting, and I remember because Arn was there, and I said, man, I know Arn must want to punch him out. He goes, and I'm gonna do it, and I know he was just doing this to scare everybody else too. He goes, and I'm gonna make sure that, I'm gonna sue Flair, and I'm gonna make sure that he's broke, and I'm gonna make sure that he spends all his money on fucking lawyers, and he was just going off, and he was just a fucking prick, I mean, you're a dick, Eric, real shit right there.
Hey, Eric, I'm not gonna disagree with anything that's been said.
Yeah.
And also, besides the fact that his facts were incorrect,
right?
Besides the fact that he's a fucking dick for saying that, also. Who is he to be the judge of drawing money in the wrestling business when the only way to me that Bischoff was able to draw money was to spend money?
Right.
The title of his book is Controversy Equals Cash. The sequel should be Bischoff Equals Bankruptcy, because it took him 5 years to build it and 2 years to lose it. So
I read a funny line. I read a funny line where Vince McMahon says that he lost like $85 million or whatever it was. He goes, now that takes talent,
Yeah.
And to me, here's my problem with Eric. I'll give Eric his props for having the balls to, stand up to Vince, in the Monday Night Wars, and bringing in the Mexicans and bringing in the NWO and everything that he did, because he did change the landscape of wrestling. But, for him to always say, well, we were bankrupt because of the censors, or we were bankrupt because of your bullshit. We were bankrupt because of your ego and, your inability to run a fucking company. You know what I'm saying? Take the credit. Take your credit.
If you're going to take the credit, you got to take the blame, right?
Right, exactly.
And once again, like you said, he did change the landscape. And there were things he did that were correct and things he did that were revolutionary. And you know what? If they'd opened up the checkbook before he got there with a better line, then maybe somebody else would have done it. Maybe they wouldn't. But he was still on his watch, regardless of who the bookers were, regardless of who the agents were or whatever. In 2 years, they went from revenues of, $100 million, or whatever the ridiculous figures were, to being sold to Vince McMahon for $4 million, or was it even that much? Something's wrong. No. You know, he hot-shotted, and he saw the results that have happened since the dawn of time, since the turn of the century, the 19th or the 20th century, not the 21st. In this country, every period of hot-shotting is followed by an equally long and probably longer down period where you're in the gutter because you can't follow it. Right. He couldn't follow it.
Plus, the one thing that Vince did, and maybe he did it due to attrition because he lost so many people and he had no other choice, whatever the reason might have been, I mean, he did something that, you know, Eric was too stupid to do. And that was, I mean, he made Chris Benoit, he made Eddie Guerrero, he made Rey Mysterio. Eric had all these people, and he held them all back because he listened to all the fucking dinosaurs on top hating on us and holding us down, you know, and that company never made new stars.
Actually, I think the best thing that Eric Bischoff ever did for Vince McMahon was sign Vince's dinosaurs for more money.
Exactly.
Because then once the dinosaurs were gone, then came the next era. Yeah. And Vince had to create those newer guys and had to give them a chance, and that freshened everything up. And then, of course, as soon as Bischoff runs the thing into the ground, then Vince signs all the dinosaurs back and continues paying them more money than the guys that beat Bischoff to begin with. But that's a story for another day as well. But between your leaving WCW and the closing up of WCW and the formation of and you joining TNA, did you work exclusively in Mexico? That was like, what, 2001, 2002, 2003?
No, I was blackballed in Mexico.
So you really couldn't even get back in there at that point.
You got to understand, when I left Pena, I left because of creative differences, nothing personal.
Right.
I left because he had gotten to the point where wrestling wasn't even secondary anymore. He had a fascination and a fixation with male strippers. And he would bring in all these little pretty boy strippers. And, you know, actually, if you think about it, even though it was more because of his own personal taste, it did bring in a lot of women to wrestling that normally wouldn't go to wrestling. So there was some madness to his, there was something to his madness and his own personal perversion, you know what I'm saying? Because it did bring in a lot of women. But you know, I was just sick of him bringing in all these strippers and all these bodybuilders. And even though I got over as a bodybuilder, and it sounds presumptuous for me to say this, I was a bodybuilder that, revolutionized wrestling in Mexico because I changed the way Mexican wrestlers dressed. They used to dress very old-fashioned, and I came in with shorts at the knees and like really bright colors. Mexicans would never wear bright colors. And have you ever seen how Shawn Michaels sometimes for a while he was wearing like little fringe, like little patches with little fringes?
Oh yeah.
He got that from me. That was my original outfit in WWE, and when I left, he took that fucking design. So I mean, I had changed the way that, you know, wrestling dressed. I had brought in a lot of moves from the United States that had never been seen before, like the Bulldog and just a lot of stuff that I had. You know, I brought an American influence to Mexico. So did Art Barr, so did Eddie Guerrero. We really brought an American influence because we were influenced by the United States. I brought something, but there were these big bodybuilders that had no charisma, had no clue, had no brain, you know, and they were trying to find the next Konnan. But the thing was, you know, Konnan wasn't just a body. You know, I had a special type of like personality, you know what I'm saying? And so he was bringing in all these.
It seems like the Mexican promoters, another difference between here and the United States, or there in the United States, the promoters here will sign the guy that just sodomized their cat and killed their dog last week.
Yeah.
Whereas in Mexico, if the promoters get pissed at you, it's a long time, if ever, before you can get back in, and they seem to hold that grudge.
I'll give you an example. This is the way I look at American and Japanese in wrestling. Their idea is, you could have fucked my wife last night and it could be on the internet, but if we can make money, we'll make
Yeah.
money. Where in Mexico, it's more like, yeah, I can make money with you, but guess what? I don't want to fuck you. That's Mexico, you know?
Okay.
So that's what they did to me. So what happened is I had amassed so much talent in my promotion, which was called Promo Azteca, because I changed the way wrestling was shot. I changed the way wrestling was produced. I was doing a lot of stuff like instead of the best 2 out of 3 falls, which is very corny to me, I would only do 1 fall. I was just really revolutionizing the product, so all the young guys wanted to be with me, plus I had access into WCW, so I was basically cherry picking the best wrestlers from both promotion. And I mean, I almost put Pena out of business, almost. And for the first time in more than 70 years, Paco Alonso, the owner of Arena Mexico, had to give out guaranteed contracts, which he'd never done in his career. So both of them had an axe to grind with me. And so when Eric made me close up shop, you know, some wrestlers went to either company. Some wrestlers were never able to get work. And I was like the Lee Harvey Oswald, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Without a doubt, you know, and there was no way that I was ever gonna. And as a matter of fact, in that period, when I couldn't get work in Mexico, I actually went to Paco Alonso's office in Arena Mexico, because Pena had sworn that he would close his company before I ever came back. Since Paco never made that statement, I said there might be an inkling I can get back in with him. So I actually went to his office to look for work, and he physically had them throw me out. So there was no way that I was going to work there. So I went to Puerto Rico, which there's no money there. But I went to Puerto Rico, and you know, since my dad's Puerto Rican, to me it was kind of a big deal to be Puerto Rican champion with Carlos Colon. And Carlos Colon does things old school. He doesn't just give the belt to anybody. So I was there like a year and a half before he gave it to me. So when he gave it to me, I was really proud. But then again, there was no money, so I was doing some shows in Europe. I was basically broken, and to tell you the truth, and I've never even said this, I had to go back on the street and hustle. You know, that's something I hadn't done since I was 17 years old. So here I am in my late 30s, you know, doing illegal shit on the street. And I just thought to myself, fuck, after everything I've done in wrestling, I'm actually hustling again. And, you know, I was going to get out of the business, and I figured out a way to talk with Pena, and that was when I was in TNA. I knew that they wanted me.
And now I got to say, a lot of people don't understand when they say, "Well, geez, you know, he sold out 48,000 seats in 1993, and he was drawing 70,000 people in Los Angeles." But when you're a wrestler, you're an independent contractor, right? And as a result, you pay out the ass in taxes, especially when you're an American citizen. I don't know what the situation is in Mexico, but you're American. You have to have not only just a couple of good years, but you have to have a number, instead of a great spectacular year where 40% of it goes in taxes and then you got to pay your own expenses. You have to have a number of good years in a row. And you'd been put in a position here where in WCW, they basically made you give up and focus your attention, give up your own promotion, focus your attention on them. You were there for a few years on contract, doing good, but all of a sudden, boom, you're done there, they're done, they don't exist. You burnt your bridge in Mexico with the existing companies. You gave up your own company. What the hell else are you going to do? And that's when you start spending what you've accumulated.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times the fans don't realize that. They think, well, that guy, you know, was on main events for 2 or 3 years. He ought to be set for life. No, it doesn't work that way. You need longevity.
Well, the thing is, I did make a lot of money. Here's the two things about that. I made a lot of money. But 2 things. One is I didn't feel like spending all the money that I had made. You know, I had my money saved. I had a big house. I had a nice car, and I lived big. You know, and I didn't want to give that lifestyle up. That was number one. I worked too hard for it. So I was being very stubborn, and I didn't want to give that up. You know, and I didn't feel like all the money that I made, now here I was going to have to spend it just to stay alive.
Right.
You know, I said, there's got to be another way. I'll either do something else. You know, there's just got to be another way. I'm not going to spend all the money that I saved. So basically, what I did is, and another thing, without a doubt, you can ask, unfortunately, you know, Eddie isn't around, but Rey Mysterio would be a very good person to ask. You ask Rey Mysterio how I spent money. I mean, I was, without a doubt, I mean, I used to wear, you know, those big chains that they have in there. I had big chain, big. I mean, I used to have the best car. When I went out to eat, everybody went out to eat with me. When I went to a club, everybody got in with me. You know, I was a womanizer. I mean, I lived my life to the fullest. You know, my outfits were most of the most expensive outfits in Mexico.
You were living the gimmick.
Oh, yeah, I was living the gimmick without a doubt. You know what I'm saying? I spent a lot of money because people looked up to me, you know, and they expected, you know, wow, there's, you know, that's Konnan, he's a star. I'm over that now. This is how I dress now. I'm cool with myself, you know. But back then, I got caught up in that.
But you know what? This is the way stars dress now anyway.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can find a rap star who looks like he get picked up for vagrancy. He's got $100 million.
Yeah,
so,
but you would have never seen me like this like 10 years ago. I mean, I was always very, you know what I mean? I let you know I had money.
Right.
But, you know, because when you've never had money and you have it, you flaunt it. You know what I'm saying? I've gotten over that part. But, you know, I spent a lot of money. But then, like I said, the money I did save, my mentality was, I'll be damned if I'm going to spend all this money now. You know, I'll find something else to do. And basically what had happened was I went to TNA and there was absolutely no money there when I first started. As you can imagine, they were just a company.
They were still in Nashville.
Yeah, they were in Nashville,
point,
like
right?
in a little swap meet farmhouse or something.
Oh, I've main evented there many times at the Nashville Fairgrounds in front of literally dozens of people. Literally.
And so it was very sad for me because I thought, wow, as much money as I made, as many places as I've been, as much as I've done, I don't have no work, you know, and plus my hip was messed up. And for whatever reason, WWE has never, ever, you know, and I don't know, I think it's Bruce Pritchard has a lot to do with this. You know, I've always heard that he's held me back there. And I just can't believe that Vince, you know, just because of what Sean and Scott said, you know, a long time ago, wouldn't let me. But Eddie went to bat for me with Ray. And they went to Vince and they told him, hey, look, we want Konnan to come in here and we vouch for him. And, oh, well, I heard he's an asshole and that, you know, he's hard to deal with.
Jesus Christ, you'd have to stand in a long line on that talent roster if he was going to hold that against you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but Jesus.
Right, which is actually what Paul Lee told me. And then Paul Lee told me that when they left the room, he went in and he goes, yeah, you know, I heard Konnan's this and that. And he was bad-mouthing me. And he goes, well, to tell you the truth, when he was in ECW, he felt so bad that he left, that when he left, he gave me Juventud Guerrera and La Park and these other wrestlers to fill in the spots that him. So I never had any problems. So I got basically vouched by 3 people, you know, with pretty good credibility and still didn't bring me in. And then Johnny Ace, who's another big dickhead, you know, he bullshits me and he goes, well, you're too old to come into WWE. And like a couple months, he hires his own brother, who's older than me, and I understand that's his brother. I go, bro, Booker T's about the same age as me. He goes, well, you know, what would you do if you were here? And I said, well, you know, I could do what I've been doing in WCW, my gangster gimmick. You know what I'm saying? I'm a thug. He goes, well, you know, we don't like to glorify violence. I go, fucking John Cena's a make-believe thug. I go, fuck, I was raised on the street. I'm the real deal. You know what I'm saying?
They don't like to glorify, but they want to empower their talent.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing. John Laurinaitis, in my opinion, is the smartest man in the wrestling business.
Yeah,
because if you take into account the money that he makes versus the qualifications he has for his job and the talent and ability he has shown for the business in the past, and you put those two together, he's got to be the smartest man in the business.
Yeah, no shit. I concur with that. But he's another jackass.
But eventually, like you said, you went to talk to Pena directly by going to TNA.
Right.
Which was probably 2003 or 2004, thereabouts.
Yeah, about 2004. The thing between me and Pena was never personal, but he really, just to show you how mad he got at me, he tried to get me deported from the country, like forever. What he did is he actually went, when I was younger in Mexico, you know, you got to remember, when I came to Mexico, I was basically fresh off the streets of Miami and San Diego, and you know, and I was never in a gang, but I was definitely a big time hustler, and I was always around gangsters and pimps and shit like that, and I had a really bad temper, and I was just the type of person that, you know, was always getting into trouble. When I was in Mexico, I had gotten into a lot of situations where I got put in jail due to the fact that Pena was Pena and I was Konnan. I was usually able to get out or pay my way out, and we were able to hide a lot of that. I had a big history of hitting people during matches because of
No, not you. Oh, come on, you go on.
No, but here was the problem.
Man, you're fighting for your life in a lot of cases in that situation. I've been there.
There's no security in Mexico is almost non-existent. As you can ask any American wrestler that's been there recently to Mexico. So basically, when I started, you got respect by knocking a motherfucker out if he got out of hand, and that let other people know you don't fuck with him because fans would jump you as a heel. And so what happened was Pena, I don't know how he did this, but he went back years and years and years, and I had some personal stuff happen too in the streets, and he had somehow found the people I had problems with, and he had them all go to a thing called Gobernacion, which is the Secretary of Interior in Mexico, and make a complaint that I was kind of like persona non grata. If you get enough complaints, they'll deport you out of the country. So basically,
he was pretty dead set on this.
He was furious. You know, you got to remember, not only did his biggest draw, which I was at that time, and his right-hand man, and the guy that built the company with him and booked everything with him and was his international liaison, you know, I did everything with him in that company. Not only was I leaving, Rey Mysterio left, Psychosis left, Juventud Guerrera left. I mean, a lot of big names left with me.
But now, part of this at that time was not that you guys just want to say, well, thanks, Antonio, see you around, but the Mexican economy went kind of south, and you guys had the opportunity to make more money than really just about any but the very, very top names in Mexico, maybe 2 or 3 guys.
Right. No, they were all about to make more money than anybody in Mexico. And another thing is besides the fact that we had creative differences, because he basically turned wrestling into a circus.
Yeah, the transvestite matches,
right?
And strippers.
Right. Like for example, I'll give you an example. I brought in the lumberjack concept that had never been done in Mexico. The lumberjack with the leather straps. I got that from something I saw Sullivan do. And what he did is he turned it from something that the first time we did it was very serious and we were whipping the shit out of the guys. Yeah. Now he had transvestites wrestling each other with midgets around the ring with belts, and I was like, Pena, you're diluting the whole.
That's what kills me about American wrestling. And I have to say it's silly.
Right, exactly. So
you kind of get embarrassed when people say, "Oh, you're a wrestler," but now we see what that is with the women dressed as men and blah 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 blah.
And I had worked so hard to maintain a certain era. Like when people saw me, this was the thing about me. When people saw me, they kind of knew, like, okay, all that other stuff is bullshit, but his shit is real, because I always made sure that my feuds were, like, real. I mean, I'd punch the guy pretty as hard as I could without it being a shoot. I'd have him punch me the same way. Our angles were very reality-based, and I still, no matter what happened, I would never break kayfabe. I could literally, we would be in the airport, and I'd be here in Perro Aguayo, could be right there, and I'd be signing somebody's autograph, and I'd go, is that Perro Aguayo? I should kill that motherfucker. I hate that. Like that.
Here's a question. Is there any doubt in your mind that the reason why wrestling in Mexico, to this day, there's 10 shows a week or whatever in Mexico City, and why the huge crowds and the business is still good all over the country as opposed to the United States, is there any doubt in your mind it's because the people still there have credibility? They still believe a lot of what they're seeing?
That's the main reason. That's the same thing in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is now starting to change because it's been so heavily influenced by America, and WWE goes there so much, and a lot of the wrestlers have been influenced by our lackadaisical attitude towards kayfabe.
Yeah.
But in Mexico, I mean, they you know, you could go to, even though now Mexico finally they're kind of starting to get it a little bit, they're starting to realize that it is kind of entertainment, but you can still open up the sports page and they'll have wrestling results in it.
And that's what drives me crazy about people who say, oh, look what Vince McMahon has done for wrestling here, look what so-and-so, wrestling is so big now. Wrestling is smaller in the United States in terms of paid admissions, in terms of people watching television overall, in terms of wrestlers making a living, than at any time in the last 110 years.
You're right.
And it's because it has no credibility. People don't believe anymore.
You're right.
It's a show. It's not the Boston Celtics. It's the Harlem Globetrotters.
Right.
And now you've got a country like Mexico where something like that, it still has credibility. You still can draw 10 or 15,000 people a week in the same building, in the same city. But do you think, will Mexico follow the United States? What will happen to the business there? Or is it protected enough Is it not just a one family vanity promotion? Is it protected enough that the same thing, that it's not going to follow the United States?
Yeah, it's protected enough. I think Pena, that was one of the reasons I left, because I think Pena was willing to Vince McMahon it in a way, but the wrestlers themselves were so against it that he knew he couldn't get away with it fully. Like, there was no way there's just no way I would ever go on Mexican TV and call it sports entertainment, because I would be shooting myself in the foot, because I go, look at what happened in the United States. So,
I was able to work for the WWF from 1993 until 1999 without ever uttering those two words together out of my mouth.
Right.
Somehow.
Right, because
it's stupid.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever bought a ticket to the sports entertainment matches?
Right.
Has anybody ever said, hey, did you see sports entertainment on television last night?
Exactly.
He wants to fool the sponsors. That's okay. That's fine. It's something else besides wrestling, so spend your money on it. But in the process, the guys have suffered, the business has suffered, and the fans have gone away. And I think Mexico may be the last country. Japan is kind of up in the air now with all the different companies, and they've gone more toward a shoot style or the actual thing. I think Mexico may be the last country where you can draw like that with pro wrestling.
Yeah. Here's the sad thing about wrestling in the United States, and now you have no choice but to deal with it, The bell can't be unrung, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The cat's out of the bag. Now it's up to, I'll give you an example, not to put ROH over, which I have no problem since I'm being paid for this interview, but like I watched the match yesterday, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm very analytical, and I'm looking at the fans, mostly 20-somethings, some 30-somethings, some younger, but I'm looking at the fan and I'm looking at them, and they're sitting there. They know this is fake, okay? There's no doubt about that. But they're respecting the work rate, and they're getting into it, and they're applauding the high spots, and they're applauding the performance, and they're really getting into it.
As a matter of fact, let me stop you. Ring of Honor or anything, these fans, they know it's not fake. They know it's prearranged. They know it may be choreographed, if you want to say that. They know that it's predetermined, but they have the respect not to say it's fake.
Yeah, because they see that they're out there. They see there's an art to what they're doing. They see the physicality. I mean, when Kento was kicking the shit out of Matt Sydal, when Samoa Joe's beat, or what Corino and Homicide did, I mean, they're out there and they're taking big risks. So they understand there's risks being taken. They understand that they're getting as physical as they can without really trying to hurt each other. They see the effort that's putting out there, where if you go to WWE show, everything's so light and everybody's just walking through the match.
Well, and the fans are laughing.
Yeah, right.
The fans are laughing. It's all a big joke. Which is why they only want to come once a year.
Right. And you might see within the context of a match, somebody like this kid, Colt Cabana, or Nigel McGuinness throw a little bit of humor. Nothing wrong with that. You know what I'm saying?
No.
But it isn't all a ha-ha, where you're almost embarrassed. Sometimes, and I'm sure you see shit on TV with WWE or TNA, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't see it on WWE because I gave up watching it a year and 10 months ago, folks, and I'm clean and sober to this day because it makes me mad.
Yeah.
It makes me mad for the times that I went to court and lied on the witness stand. It makes me mad for all the times that I made people believe what we were doing, to the extent that they would hop that rail and nail me knowing they were going to jail.
Right.
When you can, and you've been there too, when you can make somebody so mad that they will jump in and punch you knowingly going to jail for the chance to hit you one time, you've done your job and you had credibility.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden, it's all a big ha, and the camera's there while wrestlers are the worst criminals in the world. Because whenever they do something illegal, there's a national television camera watching them.
Right.
It's just so preposterous. And I think with the Ring of Honor audience, they make the extra effort to understand the art and to understand the punishment and the effort it takes to understand the whole thing. For a mainstream audience, I'm not sure there's that many people, and I don't even want to use the word smart fans, because now I think everybody's smart to an extent. They know what's going on, they just don't know how. But the Ring of Honor fans are a hardy breed in that they will go the extra mile to inform themselves and to appreciate it for what it is, whereas the guy that works at the Exxon station, when he thought they were really beating each other over the head with chairs, he'd go, but now it's like, I'll do something else.
Right.
I think that's where we lost the mass audience.
Right, exactly, without a doubt. And that's why we still have it in Mexico because we still protect it. You know, hopefully we can get more and more people like ROH fans, and you know, obviously they've been around for a little while, but it's still a little niche audience. I mean, you know, to me it's just like, I think that Mexico will always, I think Pena almost exposed it, but you know, now I'm back to give it credibility again.
Well, I was about to say, your talks with Pena were successful, and when you came back in 2004, you and Vampiro, which had not been done in ever, or at least in AAA.
Yeah, really ever.
I think your Triple Mania match in 05, Guadalajara, did 22,000 plus. You really set the business on fire again.
Yeah.
I know Pena just passed away just recently, but how was your relationship with him from the time that you got back?
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, when Pena went to TNA, which I didn't even get to explain, when he went to TNA, I had thought to myself, okay, how can I get back into Mexico? Paco just threw me out of his office.
Yeah.
I go, I know that me and Pena, you know, there was a love affair there because he was like my dad. You know, he really was like my father, my mentor, my boss, my friend. We were real close, and we had way more better good times, you know, than bad times. You know, 90% to 10%. That,
Yeah.
you know. And I thought, I know I can talk to him again, but I knew I couldn't do it in Mexico because there were too many of the boys that were happy I wasn't there to begin with. Because when I left and all the other wrestlers left with me, it opened up a lot of spaces for other guys that would have never been stars. And now they were jealously protecting their spots. And the last thing they wanted was for Konnan to come back and have power. And so what I did is I had TNA talk to Pena to bring some of his talent here to do a match between Mexico versus TNA. So Pena walks in. I don't think he even knew I worked for the promotion. So he walks in, and I was kind of nervous and I was kind of embarrassed because I knew he had helped me so much, and I felt like I turned my back on him. And so he saw me, and I went down and I talked to him, and I just basically told him, I remember I got high, and I went over there and I told him, I said, look, Tonio, I just want you to, we hadn't spoken in 7 years. And I go, look, I just want you to know something. I go, I regret leaving. You know why I left. It was really both of our faults. Because another thing he had done is I had run a place for him called Tijuana. I had gone into Tijuana and I made that city really hot for him. And it was a dead territory. And I went in there and I brought extreme wrestling there that I had seen in ECW. And I turned that place on fire. And I usually did, and what had happened was there were certain wrestlers he wanted me to bring to Tijuana. Tijuana from Mexico is real far. The tickets are real expensive.
That's what I was going to ask. Mexico is a big country, and it doesn't have a tremendous interstate system, according to the Rand McNally Road Atlas. How do the guys travel there? Is it car trips? Is it plane flights?
Mostly everybody takes buses. Buses in like over here, you've only heard of like Greyhound, and that's about it. Over they have like top-notch buses, like in Japan, really nice buses. Okay. Everybody travels in bus, except if you got to travel really far, you go on plane. But everybody's bused everywhere. And so basically Tijuana had made it a hot territory for him, and there were a lot of wrestlers that had no work, and he wanted to send them to TJ. That's what we call Tijuana. And I said, bro, I don't want those guys. They're not drawing me any money, and nobody else wants them. Just fucking get rid of them, you know. And he insisted on me using these certain wrestlers, and then there were certain wrestlers in the company that I would only bring to Tijuana. So he got mad one day, went to Tijuana, he closed down my offices, and he says, I'm taking over Tijuana, I'm going to start booking Tijuana. And I said, bro, I built this fucking place, and now you're going to close it? So that was another reason I left. So anyways, when I saw him, I told him, look, you know why I left? I know why I left. I regret ever having left you. And I just want to tell you something. If you never use me, and I did mean this, but also I did want to work with him. I go, I would love to come back and work the AAA with you. I go, but if you never use me, at least I want to be able to say I'm sorry for leaving. You know, and I want to be able to live the rest of my life at least knowing that you know that I feel remorse for what I did, you know. And then he just told me, he goes, you know, it's my company and I do whatever the hell I want. And if I want to bring you back, I will. There's a lot of wrestlers that told me you might be working here and not to talk to you. He goes, but I wanted to see what type of person you were, if you had changed or not, because, you know, you were very volatile. He goes, this is only our first conversation, and I don't know whether you might be working me. He goes, let me consult it with the pillow, which is which is a saying we have in Mexico, right?
Sleep on it.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So he slept on it for a year and a half. And, and I just kind of gave up. I said, I'm fucked. I'm never going to go back to Mexico. And, I was just thinking of ways to start a Lucha Libre promotion in the United States. When one day he called me up and he goes, I'm going to use you for the show called Guerra de Titanes, which is one of his big 4 shows that he does, which was patterned after Vince's, he's got like 4 big shows a year. And
or he used to.
Yeah, he used to, right. And so he brought me in, and it was incredible because that day 2 of the Mexican soccer teams, and soccer's just as big as football is here, 2 of the Mexican soccer teams, Mexico City, were in the semifinals. So that would be like if the Tennessee Titans were in the playoffs and another team from Tennessee were in the playoffs. Everybody's watching football. Well, we went to the toreo and we sold it out, and it was basically because of my return. And I remember before I went out, a lot of wrestlers were saying, oh, Konnan's time has come and gone. It's a new generation. A lot of people forgotten about him. And I got nervous. I thought, fuck, what if I go out there and they don't care anymore, you know? And when they heard my music, that place just went, it was probably, without a doubt, the most surreal experience I've ever had in my life in a wrestling ring. I felt, Jim, like the whole match, like I was floating on air. It was incredible when I went out. The people were just going nuts, and I was a baby face. They were so happy to see me, and Pena being the master, and plus kind of trying to show the boys I'm not going to make it that easy for me, turned me heel that same night. So the people were so happy to see me. By the end of the night, they wanted
pull it out from
yeah, he was awesome with that.
And that used to be something that would draw in the United States as well. And now maybe Hulk Hogan's return doesn't even draw. Maybe if The Rock ever does another match, which don't bet the farm on it, maybe something like that would happen. But once again in the old days, if a guy was over in a territory or part of the country and he would come back after an absence, didn't need an angle, didn't need a big TV build, it just let the people know he was going to be there. And those we say simple. It's not simple to draw 20-something thousand people. And it's not simple to stay out of the country for 5 years to do it or whatever. But something like that, without taking a chainsaw on television and cutting somebody's head off, just a return, or this guy's going to put up his mask or his hair for the first time or whatever, because that's been protected. You still get those big crowds when the guy is over or when the time is right. And that's what I miss about wrestling.
Yeah.
I wish I could speak Spanish so I could understand, the commentary and get in the whole atmosphere. But that's what I miss about wrestling is some of those simple things that sell the place out.
You're right. Because looking back on it, you are right. It was not a gimmick match. There was no feud between me and the guy I was wrestling with. As a matter of fact, he told me, bring somebody with you, anybody you want. And I actually brought Rikishi with me, who nobody knew who he... I mean, they kind of knew him because WWE was over there, but, and it was incredible. Yeah, you're right. We didn't have to use no angle, no nothing. Just he's coming back, and it sold out. And so then what happened is he was very impressed by the fact that after so many years, I was able to, because he needed something big to counter, these 2 teams in the playoffs, and he found it. And our relationship was awesome. Let me tell you, the best thing for me, this is like when I really thought, wow, I think I could actually retire after today. I finally came back to Mexico. I came back to a Hero's Welcome. He missed a show in a place called Torreon. As a matter of fact, I had brought X-Pac to that show with me and Ron Killings, and he didn't make it. And he called me up, and he goes, you ready to do something like the old days? I go, what? He goes, I want you to run the dressing room. And I said, all right. And I ran the dressing room, and it felt like, it just felt like the old days, I was telling him, I want you to do, and everybody was listening, nobody was like, oh, why is he giving me orders? Or I thought, he was coming back just to wrestle, nobody gave me an attitude, everybody was listening, there was a respect for me there, and where before people were always like, well, fuck, why is he giving us orders? And he would call me and he would go, can you give me ideas for this, or can you give me an idea for that? And here's the other funny part about it, and maybe you've heard about this before. He did something subliminally that I remember Art Barr, who was like my brother before he passed away in Mexico. You know how sometimes when people know they're going to die, they do stuff that they normally don't do because they kind of know they're going to die?
Yeah.
That night in Monterrey, we shot the biggest angle of the year. This one heel guy called Cibernetico. We turned on him and made him the biggest baby face in the promotion. And that day, I remember Pena was like, I don't know if he was drunk or if he was coked up or what he was, but he didn't look good. And I went up to him and I go, man, I go, Toño, I go, you need to take care of yourself, man. We need you. A lot of people are counting on you. I go, take care of yourself, bro. I don't like the way you're looking. And he just looked at me and he goes, you know, I love you, right? And I said, I love you too, man. And he just hugged me. That was the last words he ever told me, you know. And it's kind of freaky, you know, because he never would tell me that ever.
People maybe get a feeling because you hear that, you know, that they said or did things out of character, and maybe they just had a feeling.
Yeah, he would never tell me he loved me or nothing like that. You know, he would always tell me, you're like a son to me, or, you know, I'm so glad. I remember one time we were in a place called Guadalajara, and we were in a bar, and we were talking business. He goes, you know what, I'm glad you came back. He goes, I missed you, and you know, the promotion needed you. He goes, to tell you the truth, I've been burnt out on ideas, and all everybody ever does is give me ideas on how to get themselves over, and you've always thought of the company first. He goes, and I want to let you know I appreciate that. But he never said I love you, you know.
Yeah.
And that night he said that, and those were the last words he said to me, which was very sad, you know. But I was happy, and I thanked the Lord, and his family was happy that we reconciled. Because when he passed away and I was at his funeral, I was talking to his sister, who's one of the people that's helping run the company. And she says, you know, it was very important for us to see you reconcile with Pena. You know, he goes, you know, he loved you. And I go, yeah, I know that. He goes, you know, you hurt him when you left. And I go, yeah, I know. And he goes, but I'm glad that at least before he passed away, you guys reconciled because you were like a son to him. So, you know, that was very good for me. And, you know, if he would have passed away and I wouldn't have reconciled with him, I don't know what I would have done, you know.
Right now, you're splitting your time. Obviously, AAA means a lot to you, and you have a more important part in that now as far as booking and creative run of the dressing room, helping with that end of the business there, and also, I think the hottest new, I hate to say act. The hottest new gimmick in TNA has been LAX, and that was kind of a surprise, I think, to a lot of people. Something that happened and they went with, but the formation of the Latin American Exchange, can you tell us anything about how that kind of came together and what you think kicked it up a notch?
Yeah, I think, well, LAX, what had happened was they had put, when I got the TNA, you know, Jeff goes, do you have any ideas? And I said, yeah, well, why don't we do a thing where I'm mad that, you know, you guys have this thing called the X Division. You have a 6-sided ring, which you got all of that from Mexico. And I go, but you don't give credit to it.
There was a AAA invention, a Pena invention.
Yeah, there was a Pena invention. And I go, and so I said, and you know, and as usual, you know, you're raping, you know, you're raping our culture, and you're not giving us any credit. And that, which I had a lot of good material for that, and that might have lasted all of 3 weeks, you know. And I was really hot, and I go, bro, we've got so much here, and you know, and so then he had nothing for me to do, so. I always used to get along with BG, and Ron Killings was my dog, so I said, why don't you put us together? And I wanted us to kind of be like thugs because, you know, Ronnie had been in jail before. He loves rap music, you know, and BG's like about one of the realest motherfuckers I've ever met. You know, he'll tell you what he's thinking in a heartbeat, you know what I'm saying? You know Road Dogg, right?
The Armstrong, I know all the Armstrongs. As a matter of fact, Brian had one of his first matches in Tennessee for me, I think like his third match he ever had, in Brad, his brother's old Arachnoman outfit, turned inside out, and we called him the Dark Secret because his whole family was working for us at the time. And I mean, they're so over and great. All the Armstrongs can work. That's all I'm gonna say. They can all work.
Yeah,
they got the genes.
So he put us together, but you know, Jeff wanted kind of like a Milli Vanilli, like 3 guys that were kind of Milli Vanilli, you know, and. He had us do some.
Were you going to be Millie or Vanilli? I can't say.
Probably, who knows, Spikili. But I don't know. Anyway, so he never really gave us the push that we deserved, and we did a lot of comedy stuff that was actually pretty funny. I saw a 3 Live Crew DVD the other day, and I was actually laughing at it because we did a lot of, you know, ad-libbing and impromptu stuff. We did a lot of skits, you know, in Nashville, and we were actually pretty funny, but. You know, we never really got a push. Nobody took us seriously. We were always everybody would beat us. I go, man, we look like bitches all the time. So basically what they did is when Dusty Rhodes took over, he wanted to get Kip James and Road Dogg to reform DX. So basically they took me and Ronnie out, then I went and I talked to Jeff and I said, leave me and Ronnie together. You know, Ron Killings.
Yeah.
Said, leave us together because we have chemistry and I got some good ideas. Oh, no. Ronnie needs to be alone. You need to be alone. So I said, fuck, man. So basically I just told them, I go, well, let me, you know, now that, you know, you guys are having, you know, now that immigration reform is a big thing, let me start a Latino crew and let us fucking just go out there and talk about racism in the United States and racism in this industry. And, you know, they didn't like the idea. But, bro, I was gonna stay on them till either they did it or they fired me. You know, and I just think, my personal opinion is, I think they knew, okay, we need the Hispanic market and we need to do something with Konnan in it. So let's put this group together. Maybe he'll shut up. Let's just give him a bone. But I just...
To me, when I first saw it, I said, okay, it's topical. These guys look real. You know, you can talk. Homicide can fly. Hernandez is strongest son of a bitch I've seen in a while. It's believable. It's topical. It can work. I love the entrance through the crowd, the Spanish announce, whatever the case. You know, and I think that you're the type of heels. You could be the Freebirds 30 years later for the Latino community, the cool heels. That eventually you're going to be the baby faces no matter what, but right now you're despicable son of bitches.
Right. So what I did is I came up with an idea. You know, I thought, okay, we've got to have like a cool name. So I started to think of all these names. And I thought, all right, Latin American Exchange, LAX, that sounds cool. So I said, look, I want a group and it'll be called LAX, you know. And then at first they were like, bro, you should see it.
The airport will sue you.
Yeah. That's exactly what they did.
No, please,
I swear to God. I swear to God.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
I swear to God.
I was
being a smart ass.
No, I was told, you know, Dixie looked it up, Dixie Carter, and, you know, that's the LA Airport's, you know, acronym, and they can sue us. I go, bro, I think they got better things than you know what I'm saying? So I somehow got that pushed through. Then they gave me some corny music, and I said, fuck that. I went to this guy that I know in San Diego, you know, a producer that does rap records, and I did a rap song with another guy called Maniaco. We put that together, so I was happy with that, and I had to get the team together. So I tried to push Homicide, and since they didn't know who he was, they'd never seen him work, I got everything from he's too short, well then I'll tell him to put lifts in his boots, that he doesn't have a nice body, you know, he needs to work out. I go, bro, aren't we past that already? The guy can work, and that's all that matters anymore. I mean, that was a bitch to get done. Anyways, to make a long story short, we finally got the group together. I got a t-shirt design, and I think it was Dutch Mantel. He started off with, let's just have them standing around with you at the Spanish announce table. I think they were just kind of, you know, they had bigger fish to fry, and they just said, okay, let's just do this for now and see what happens. So basically, at the beginning of the thing of the LAX, I would be over at the announce table, and they would be standing with me with little signs that said, you know, we don't speak English, learn to speak Spanish, no gringos allowed.
Yeah, that's,
you know,
that's right when I picked up on things, and that to me was a part of the program that stood out. I like it. It was new faces. I think TNA ought to be about new faces that haven't really been on other people's television programs, and that stood out. Right.
And so then I thought to myself, all right, so I thought, okay, what are we going to be? Because we need to clearly define what we are. I said, we're militant thugs. That's what we are. You know, Homicide used to be in the Latin Kings. I used to be in the street hustling. I go, we're thugs, but we're militant. We're not just fucking dumbasses. You know, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So basically, once I got my time, what I started to do was I started to basically, you know, I was just basically voicing what I had felt in this business and in this country. To me, I've always been hurt by the fact that I was born in this country, that I served in the military, and there's still racism against Latinos. You know, I've always been mad at the fact that my mother didn't speak good Spanish and they made fun of her. You know, I've always been mad at the fact that in the wrestling industry, just because a guy doesn't speak English, he can't get a push. You know, does talent count for anything? I mean, look at Muda. He never spoke any English and he got over. You know what I'm saying? I just felt they were bullshit excuses not to push a guy. So when I would
plus, when you really feel that, it's not some writer putting words in your mouth.
Right.
you can express it and you can have the passion and the emotion.
Right, and then it was funny because they would write little stuff for me. You know, I would read it and they would say stuff like, "Hey, white guy, yeah, you know, hey, white guy, you know, we're Latinos and we're coming here to take over." And I said, "All right, so basically all you want me to do is go off on white boys? Is that what you want me to do?" "Yeah, well, you know, this is Dutch. You know, well, you know, you make sure you say this and you say that, and you know." And I said, "Well, look, I can't say this." "Well, you say it how you feel it," you know. So that was cool because now my passion was going to come out. And the minute I started to talk about, you know, I think I was talking to you about this one time where you like that one line where this revolution will be televised.
Will be televised.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So what I did is I started to say stuff like, you know, it says in the American Constitution that all men are created equal, but if you look at the fine print and you read it again, it says all men are created equal if they're white, you know. And then we did the one thing where we hung the Uncle Sam in effigy, and I was whipping him, and I go, "To me, America stands for exploitation. You know, it stands for, you know," and so I was getting all this stuff out of me that I really did feel, you know, and it just took off. I mean, you know, we were never pushed. We were basically put in a position to do a job for AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels at the pay-per-view. That was basically what was going to happen. All of a sudden, you know, they're getting emails, because Dutch would send me the emails, and people were like, "How the hell do you let that guy go on TV and say that? Do you know that the American flag, you know, stands for this?" And, you know, all these people were hot. I said, "Good, we're pushing their buttons. That's what we want. This is a fake show that people know, and they're getting mad, and they're writing emails. They somehow found Dutch's email to write him this shit. That's good." You know, we had an Orlando police officer go up to Jeff. He was pissed off. And he goes, "I can't believe you guys are doing that. That's racist. You know, I'm going to call Spike TV." You know, and Jeff looked at me and goes, "Can you believe a cop got mad?" And I go, "Yeah, because the biggest racists, they've left the white sheets for police outfits. They're the biggest fucking racists." You know, so I think they knew they were touching a nerve, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it just like took off almost like Eddie Guerrero did, you know? And so now they're like, "All right, well, fuck, I think we got something here." And the next thing you know, we were supposed to put over Chris and AJ. Next thing you know, they gave us the titles. And, you know, so you have Hernandez and Homicide, because very rare, and you know this as a matter, you know this, very rare can a real good talker back up what he does in the ring. Usually his talking's a lot better than what he does in the ring. When you can get a guy that can equate what he does in the ring with his talking, you've got magic.
Yeah.
So now, you know, I'm broken down now, but these guys could do what I was saying. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. You could sell the ticket. You could talk them in the building, and they could give them the match that makes them want to come back.
Like you did with your
boys.
With
the Midnight Express, I didn't have to worry because I could do the promo to get them in there, and I knew once they got there, they would see a match as close to as good as what I was saying it was going to be as humanly possible.
Right.
So if you can talk them in and they can give them the match, then you got credibility and they want to come back and see it again.
Right. Plus, they knew that I had wrestled before. If need be, I'd go in there and put a foot up somebody's ass, you know. And once I get my hip surgery, I will be back doing that, you know. Yeah. So, like now, another thing that I've been adding is, like, right after I do my promos, this is very new, but it gets over with the people. When we start the match, we usually jump the guy, and I get in there too, you know, so it's that thug mentality, you know, and then I get out. But I just think, you know, that it's one of those, you see it a lot I don't know if you see it a lot in wrestling, but it does come along every now and then. Something you didn't expect to get over gets over, so let's ride it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the Freebirds slamming a door on Kerry Von Erich's head in Texas in 1982, or you could go back to numerous instances, actually Steve Austin 316, totally unplanned. Totally, Steve Austin says that on an interview, and we show up the next day at Raw, and thousands of signs say Austin 316.
Right.
And then we say, well, I guess we got something.
Right.
The things that draw the biggest money in this business are usually unplanned.
Right. And to me, it's like, it's really been, you know, now that I'm older and I've been longer in the business and, you know, I don't let my ego, you know, run rampant, you know, it's very humbling to see that. You know, because I didn't, to tell you the truth, Jim, I didn't want my legacy in wrestling to be, you know, 3 Live Crew or what happened in WCW.
Yeah.
And if this can be my legacy, and I hopefully one day LAX will be, you know, up there, you know, with NWO, the Four Horsemen, you know, the Midnight Express. You know what I'm saying?
I can identify with what you're saying because one of the main reasons why I'm in TNA and started there is because I did not want the last thing I did on national television to be that stinky bad stuff I did in the WWE. Right. So I'm with you on that. And I think we're almost out of time. So before we cut, I will say, Konnan, thank you very much, because I want to do a volume 2 with you sometime where we can talk about where wrestling in Mexico and wrestling in the United States you think is going in the future. We've got up to date. Now let's look ahead on the next one.
Yeah, I just want to say I'd never really met you before. I've been in the...
we've never been in the same place.
Yeah, we've never been in the same place. It's been an honor and a privilege. I worked with you last night in Ring of Honor, and, you know, just talking with you, you're a very intelligent guy. I'm just so happy that there's still people like you in this business that still have a passion and that get mad when they see things aren't done right, because I'm the same way, you know, and I think, you know, we get heat for that, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It just shows the love that we still have for the sport, and we don't like to see other people tearing it down, you know, and I still love this sport, and, you know, that's why I'm still in it, you know what I'm saying?
And thank you very much, because after meeting you, I know we've got a lot in common, and I think besides scaring us, that should scare other people. We've got something in common. That should be a frightening thing.
A guy from Kentucky and a Latino from Miami, that is true.
Folks, for Ring of Honor and the Straight Shootin' Series, I'm Jim Cornette with my special guest, Konnan.
LAX, baby.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.